Well, Mason Mount has rejected 2 offers from Chelsea. It's not true that Chelsea have, in inverted commas, agreed to sell Mason Mount.
One piece of early news you mentioned there, that players decided on their future. We heard obviously recently that Roberto Firmino would be leaving the club. Now, I want to start, Ben, if I can, with another player who's out of contract at Liverpool. We know Keita and Oxlade-Chamberlain are heading out, but James Milner's future remains relatively undecided, I think it's safe to say. But you recently told Give Me Sport that although he would like to extend his stay at Liverpool, it could ultimately be time for the player and the club to part ways. And that seems to be the Liverpool perspective on it now. Do you want to speak on that a little bit more for us?
I think that's accurate. There's been no talks yet about any kind of renewal. Jurgen Klopp has said that he values James Milner, and a lot may also depend on Milner. Does he see himself playing another season at Liverpool or elsewhere? What are his plans for post-football? And you can sort of see some kind of halfway house, almost, at least in theory, where Milner wants to have less of a role on the football side, but stay within Liverpool in some capacity. Those conversations haven't yet happened to any degree, and time is running out. And because Liverpool haven't acted yet or tied anything up with James Milner, it's looking like a parting of ways is very possible. Now, if Milner was offered something, I'm sure he'd take it and would like another year at Liverpool. He said very openly that he still feels that he can complicate things in some ways by the fact that Liverpool would be looking at younger and a midfield revamp, but Milner in form would give that question mark and something to think about in terms of continuity and having that experienced head. And that's where the complication lies. It's a very pleasant headache to have in many ways, but Milner's form, Milner's consistency, Milner's on-field impact has kind of waned a little bit. And I know it was only one little moment, and we certainly shouldn't blow it up to be bigger than it was. But I think back to the Chelsea-Liverpool game at Anfield, and there was one moment where Mudryk came on, he was making his debut, and his lightning pace, and Mudryk's one of the quickest players in the Premier League, which is why I don't want to make something blown out of proportion. But it just sort of showed me as Mudryk zipped past Milner with ease, almost in second gear, that golf. And what Liverpool need at the moment, particularly in that position, is not just the leadership and the quality that Milner can bring when on the ball, but pace and dynamism and energy and players that can win the ball back and defend from the front. And Milner used to have a bit of everything. And obviously now certain parts of his game are not probably up to the standard that Liverpool need. And that's why I think that even though Klopp values the experience, the squad player, in essence, Liverpool haven't moved yet to try and tie him down. So it is still a fluid situation, but I think it's very possible that James Milner leaves at the end of the season. And if he does, I think that that will be more a club decision rather than necessarily Milner telling them that he wants to go. Whereas with Bobby Firmino, it was the other way around. Liverpool were absolutely desperate to try and keep Firmino, and they tried, but it was Firmino that dictated he was going to go at the end of the season. With Milner, it could well be the other way around. Even though Klopp is one voice and values Milner, I think that if you are quite cold-hearted about it and you think about Liverpool's future rather than only the now, then a parting of ways might be the best scenario for everybody.
Yeah, 100%. And there's lots of different factors to this. I think you touched on his experience and what he offers around the dressing room and around the training ground and indeed the squad. And even we're going to bring in some new players, and Milner's influence on them could be really important. But the flip side of that is you're freeing up a space in the squad for a start. You're freeing up some wages. And like you say, Milner himself might be thinking, I can still offer something on the pitch here. And just to finish on Milner, Ben, I wanted to ask you, do you think if he was to become a free agent, there'd be suitors out there for him, wouldn't there?
For sure. In essence, you have a player that's a fantastic influence and leader, and it's all just going to depend on what he wants to do with his career. Does he want to stay within football? And is there anything from a transitional position that he can do with one extra season, either at Liverpool or elsewhere? There might be some clubs that are coming up to the Premier League that want that type of experience. And he strikes me as the kind of player that isn't going to demand to play every single week, not at this kind of level.
No.
Alternatively, does he want to try a new experience abroad? Is somewhere like MLS a possibility for him? Is a payday in one of those leagues that we know are notorious for banding money around, the kind of option for him. Yeah. And I think with James Milner, because the kind of character he is, leader he is, influence he is, you're going to get a high volume of interest. And the beauty of kind of leaving Liverpool for Milner, for me, is wherever he goes, everyone would know that it's only short term. So if Milner stays at Liverpool, you might get a few groans from Liverpool fans because they appreciate what he's done. They appreciate that he's still been involved this season, and they know the kind of impact he can have, but it still feels like comparative. Why are we extending him rather than, as you say, freeing up the squad space and bringing in somebody that's a bit more dynamic, a bit younger, and for our future? If somebody new signs James Milner, they know that it's probably only a season or 2 seasons maximum. Yeah. They're well aware of the age when they sign the player, and they're saying, can he help us stay up? Can he help us consolidate in the Premier League? Can he help us go up if he drops down to the Championship, or from the perspective of other leagues like MLS? Yeah. Can he ultimately add that little bit of star power and quality that maybe our team or our league is lacking? So it's sort of a win-win in that respect, because it becomes fresh start, fresh challenge, short-termist, and a new fan base can get excited about James Milner. Whereas to get the Liverpool fan base excited about James Milner, he's got to somehow roll back the years consistently. And to me, that seems like a very big challenge at the moment.
Yeah, 100%. I make you right on that. And the MLS is a fascinating point of view, actually. I hadn't even considered that, but we've seen so many players do it down the years, haven't we? There's no reason why not. Speaking about some fresh faces, or potential fresh faces, as it were, I'm going to come to Ryan Gravenberch to begin with. You recently wrote that there are fading chances for Liverpool of making that deal happen. Obviously, Bayern Munich youngster, somebody Liverpool were interested in before he went to Munich from Ajax. Where does that situation lie as things are?
Well, at the moment, Thomas Tuchel made it one of his first priorities to speak to the player. It was very telling in his first training session that there was quite a long conversation between Gravenberch and Tuchel. And from what I understand, they've also had one-on-ones to try and work out why the signing from Ajax didn't work under Julian Nagelsmann. There's 2 sides to every story. From the perspective of Nagelsmann, he was quite frustrated by the players' lack of discipline defensively. Okay. And I think with Gravenberch, he likes being given a little bit more freedom and to get box to box and to try and have an impact both in the centre of the park, but also in more advanced areas where he can. And he's not known as a prolific goal scorer, but he can still impact through assists, through winning back second balls, and then distributing very quickly and making his presence felt, because he's 6'3" and he can drag defenders out of positions, and he does chip in with the odd goal, or he can. But then since moving to Bayern in a more competitive squad, I think that Nagelsmann wanted to use him a bit more rigid and in game management scenarios, and felt like that defensive work ethic and that tactical acumen wasn't there at times. Okay. So when you look on paper at Gravenberch at Bayern since he's moved, I think it's 26 appearances and 1 goal, but he hasn't started that many games. So if Nagelsmann had stayed, come the end of the season, the player might have felt quite unsettled, and Nagelsmann clearly didn't manage him particularly well. 2 sides to every story, but that will definitely be the perspective of Gravenberch, that he was kind of frozen out a little bit, that he wasn't motivated, that he didn't really get a fair chance, and that he wasn't played to his strengths. That's where Liverpool come in with, as you say, that historical interest, and they say maybe there's a window of opportunity here. But Thomas Tuchel's made it absolutely clear that the player's going to get a clean slate, a fresh start, and that makes the summer transfer very unlikely, because obviously he's not even been at Bayern for a full season. They have to think about what they paid, getting any kind of value if they get rid of him, but also Thomas Tuchel and looking at him through different eyes. And this is why I think that Gravenberch is going to stick it out through the summer now at Bayern, and anyone prizing him away from them is going to have a task on their hands. One, because to get a player that soon after they joined a club like Bayern, you're not going to get market value. Liverpool don't usually go down that direction. You've got to persuade the player, who under a new manager is more settled. And when you add those 2 things up, any possibility of prizing him away again in the short term now is far less likely than it was if Julian Nagelsmann was still at the club.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, really. And I suppose in many senses, a little bit of a shame from Liverpool's perspective, because you look at a player like Gravenberch, tons of ability. And you think if it hasn't worked at Bayern like it wasn't previously working at Bayern, you could land yourself a real bargain there if he wants out of the club. But like you say, with Tuchel there now, and it actually leads us on to our next point quite nicely, not only because it's Tuchel, but also because the new manager at the club looking at a player through very different eyes, and that's Frank Lampard going in at Chelsea and the Mason Mount situation. Now, this one fascinates me because in my eyes and to my money, a brilliant footballer, England international, has been a regular for Chelsea down the years, hasn't been favoured pretty much exclusively this season, whether it be under Potter or prior to that even. What do you make of that situation right now? Liverpool have been heavily linked with Mason Mount, I think it's fair to say, as of other clubs. Liverpool seem to remain well in the mix right now. But in terms of Mount's future, how do you see that panning out over the summer?
Well, Mason Mount has rejected 2 offers from Chelsea. And the thing to understand here is that under the new ownership group, the Mount that started these talks versus the Mount now is not only a player whose form has declined, but he's dealing with conversations that have shifted, because when he first started speaking, he could have potentially, if it had moved fast, got a deal similar to Reece James, which would have made him one of the highest earners at the club and being quite, for want of a better word, Abramovich-like. Whereas since January, Chelsea are all about everyone buying into a new wage structure that is more incentive driven. So you've got to sign a longer term contract. You've got high potential to earn, but your base wage may be lower. That's not to say that it wouldn't still be improved from his current deal, but maybe lower than the number that Mount wants. And there's also incentives that work the other way, whereby the club has the ability to reduce your wage if Chelsea don't make Champions League football. And I think that's quite problematic as well, because imagine if Mount had signed in January, whatever he signed for was looking like, and still is, unless Chelsea win the Champions League, declining come the end of the season. And this is normal in the sense Manchester United have always had this. It was an issue with Cristiano Ronaldo. I think he scored 18 goals in the Premier League in the season before he left last season, and then was asked to take a wage cut. And he didn't feel that that was fair because his personal performance had ultimately been quite strong, but the team hadn't made the Champions League. So there's a lot of moving factors here. And then obviously when Mount first started speaking, he was coming off the back of a season where he scored 11 Premier League goals. And now the form and the game time has both declined. So does that impact what Chelsea want to offer as well? So the situation is that there's an impasse, and talks at the time we're recording have been parked and will be picked up either towards the end of the season or at the end of the season. Now, it's not true that Chelsea have, in inverted commas, agreed to sell Mason Mount. I've seen some speculation out there that has suggested that Chelsea have somehow given up and Mount will definitively be sold. Chelsea still really rate Mount. They want to keep Mount, and they will therefore try a dialogue with Mount, and that could still be impacted by new manager and where Chelsea even finish. If they can somehow make a push for European football, it might not sound like a lot, but it shows progress. And it's not so much having Europa League or Europa Conference League, it's progress. Whereas if Mount under Lampard, who you'd expect, by the way, to play him, but if Mount under Lampard isn't scoring, isn't playing, Chelsea finish 11th in the table, the squad is still swollen, there's no real certainty over the new manager is, then Liverpool become in a strong position because they are able to say, here's a clear project, this is your role, you can either help us return to Champions League football, or Liverpool could still obviously mathematically get Champions League football, and then there becomes a big difference between the two projects. So Liverpool have the advantage at the moment in the sense that the interest is concrete, they're moving, they feel like there's a real opportunity. Mount is of the right age. They feel like the right manager can help him recapture that goal scoring form of last season. And perhaps most importantly, they can give him a clear and defined role.